Hello everybody, my name is Dratnos, and today we have the big M plus Affix cook that was promised in the interview last week. Greetings Dungeoneers! This week's beta update includes major changes to the Mythic Keystone Affix system in the War Within based on player feedback. Our primary goal with these updates is to refine the Mythic Plus experience to better serve a diverse player base. They were talking in the interview primarily about high key players and low key players having different objectives and experiences with Mythic Plus with different types of affixes. Previously, we approached Mythic Keystones with a one-size-fits-all approach, which proved challenging in striking the right balance and limited our design space. In this new build, you will see significant shifts in our design philosophy. We recognize the importance of weekly variety for those progressing through the system. However, for players pushing high keys, this variance has sometimes felt restrictive. We've also heard your feedback about wanting affixes with both positive and negative effects, as well as the desire for thematic nods similar to past affixes. This update aims to meet those diverse expectations. We're maintaining the core goals of our last round of changes, but without the limitations of a one-size-fits-all approach. This flexibility allows us to craft a more tailored experience for each of the different playstyles. Let's dive into the revamped affix system. We're reducing the total number of mechanical affixes on a keystone for players progressing through the system from 2 to 1. The following affixes are being retired for War Within: Sanguine, die. Bolstering, die. Raging, die. And bursting, okay, yeah, that one's, it depends on the situation, but fair enough, die as well. We've heard feedback that applying bonuses unevenly to players feels exclusionary, regardless of overall impact. Affixes that were part of the last Mythic Keystone test will no longer apply to Keystones. Reckless, Focused, Attuned, and Thorned. So, these affixes, aside from Thorned, which would randomly show up on death logs, they could add danger and difficulty to the keys, ignoring a little bit of armor, a little bit of haste on some casters, like that was relevant. But for the most part, I would summarize these affixes as like nothing, kind of. Like it was sort of an affix row with like, there's a little bit of something there, but for the most part, they didn't really exist. And 10% more damage of some schools on some mobs in some packs in the dungeon was also not really anything. So it was kind of like a weird, rarely noticeable negative effect, although on some particular mobs really noticeable, and then a weird, basically never noticeable positive effect. Again, except, the bleed one was like 30%, so if you had a really bleed-heavy comp, you could maybe feel it on those mobs, so that was, I think these affixes were stronger than, they were lower impact, so they were better for the game than some of the, you'd much rather have any of these affixes on your key than these ones, at least I would, but I definitely don't think that they were good. Like, these are the kind of affixes you look at and you're like, this isn't right? Like, this doesn't feel right, so I'm glad they are going back to the drawing board here, although, depending on what's, in a bad season, I would absolutely be like, man, I wish they just kept these stupid affixes instead of, cooking up some Sanguine 2.0 or whatever. Our one bucket of active affixes progressing through the system offers variety along with positive effects for executing those affixes that apply more evenly. We're reintroducing thematic elements to affixes by invoking Xalatath in M+, with her own set of affixes. We're utilizing passive affixes to signpost expected increases in player mastery and commensurate rewards as players progress through the M+ system. We're aiming to eliminate push weeks by providing a consistent challenge that focuses solely on the dungeon for players seeking to advance deeper into keys for scores and titles. Great. The push week, dead week phenomenon was very negative for high M plus players, right? Like, if you're doing high M plus and you feel like of the 12-week calendar, 2 to 4 are playable weeks and 8 to 10 are weeks where you're unlikely to be able to earn your highest Keystone score. That's a pretty unfortunate situation, right? Like, there's not a lot of games that you can log into, and it's like, come back in a month for 1 week. That's when you can play this game, right? Like, imagine if there was League, and it's just like, you log in, and it's like, yeah, if you lose, you're losing 40 LP today, and if you win, you're getting 10. But that's gonna, in a month, it'll go back to even or something like that. Like, then you just feel like, okay, this is kind of stupid. So I think that this is definitely a desirable goal. And again, it sounds like they have something for this that's going to make this different in high versus low keys. So let's see exactly what that is. New affixes. Starting at level 2, Xalatath herself will manifest in dungeons, which Xalatath, notably, villain of this expansion, potentially villain of the entire World Soul Saga. But maybe that's going to mean that this has sort of got some degree of seasonality to it. Maybe not seasonal, but like expansion level. This would change to a different villain in next expansion or something. introducing a rotation of affixes under the banner of Xal'atath's Bargain. These affixes not only seek to empower the dungeon's denizens, but also grant players the opportunity to harness their effects. For our first test this week, we'll have 2 Xal'atath's Bargain affixes available. One affix is an event that players must deal with periodically, while the other is a passive effect on creatures throughout the dungeon. So the first of those is Xal'atath's Bargain Ascendant. While in combat, Xal'atath rains down orbs of cosmic energy that attempt to empower nearby enemies, increasing their haste and movement speed. If players disrupt these orbs, they claim this effect for themselves. So are these like... There's a bunch of different ways that this could work, all of which I could see being fun. If they're like swirlies and an orb is dropping from the ceiling and you have to move the mob out of the swirly and then you soak the swirly instead, that could be fun. Or if they're orbs that are actually mobs that, come in from the edges, that would actually maybe be worse because maybe you'd accidentally pull stuff. You see it comes from the edge and then something spreads onto it because it's in combat, and then something spreads onto another nearby pack, or like you typhoon it because you're trying to disrupt it or something, and then it goes into a mob. That could be potentially annoying, but either way, I mean, mobs getting some haste and movement speed, not the end of the world generally if mobs get a little bit of haste and movement speed, but it'll be nice if you can take that instead for yourself. Pretty cool. Xal'atath's Bargain Frenzied, on the other hand, says non-boss enemies become frenzied at 30% health remaining, increasing their haste by 40%, but damage taken by 20%. Phenomenal. Great. I mean, this is what raging should have been forever, right? Like, the mob is going to become more dangerous, but haste by 40% versus unstoppable is a huge difference in counterplay. Like, huge difference. Like, you can see this coming. You can be ready to react. You can be ready to still kick. The kick gets a little bit harder, but you got rewarded. Increased damage taken. Excellent, right? Like this. Now, when this is active that week, you're going to be like, oh, cool, the mobs are going to die a little bit faster. Now, increasing damage taken by 20% below 30% health kind of just means, like, you can... Because the damage taken increase starts at a health threshold rather than a time threshold, and because it lasts until the mob dies rather than for a certain amount of time, that does mean that this isn't like a huge execute damage value increaser or anything like that. I don't think it changes the relative value of execute damage at all. You're going to get fewer globals in execute, but they're going to hit harder. I think that cancels out. You shouldn't hold your CDs for enemies become frenzied or anything like that. This is like Harlan Sweet. A lot of people misunderstand the incentive offered by Harlan Sweet, and they think, oh, I should be really saving CDs for the end. And you should do that if you want to pad, if you want to look good on the damage meters. But it doesn't actually help you kill the dungeon faster to do that. And same with Frenzied. It's not going to help you kill the dungeon faster to save damage for when mobs are low, because damage that gets mobs low faster is equally valuable to damage that kills mobs once they're low. Again, because it's not time-based, because there's no time element here, because it's all just percent health-based. Starting at Keystone level 7, a new affix, Challenger's Peril, directly affects the dungeon timer. This affix emphasizes precise play and strategic execution, placing greater risk on players' decision. Challenger's Peril says dying subtracts 15 seconds from the time remaining rather than 5 seconds. Interesting. So this is like a mini affix, right? Like it looks like this is just always level 7 plus you get Challenger's Peril, so no different things on this row. It's just Challenger's Peril. It comes in at level 7, and realistically, this is probably this is minus a minute per 6 deaths, right, that you're getting in the key, because it's 10 extra seconds per death compared to what you would have had before. So if you have a 10-death dungeon run, then you're losing an extra minute and 40 seconds in a Keystone, which, depending on the key, this could absolutely happen. I've timed a lot of 10s this season with 20 deaths. That would not be as easy to do, right? Like a 20 death run, that's 3 minutes and 20 extra seconds of time lost under Challenger's Peril. But on the other hand, if you have now a clean but low damage run, that's gonna feel relatively better. It's not actually any better, but it's gonna feel better compared to playing dangerous, dying a lot. Deaths are gonna feel worse. Now, I don't actually have a huge problem with dying removing more time from the timer. I will say I do find wiping an M+ to be extremely punishing whenever the graveyard is in a bad place. I think that's something that they should, particularly now that they have Challenger's Peril, I think they should be able to look at that and be like, okay, we have a standardized system by which 5 deaths is extremely costly, is extremely punishing to teams. Let's make sure that people are never running back, for more than a minute. Like, let's stop this. This is too much. So, and let's put in those checkpoint update things that delves have, because that way people will know where their checkpoints are getting updated, where they're going to release to, and they can see it, and you don't have to just memorize, oh, this boss updates my graveyard, this boss doesn't. That would be really nice, I think. Starting at Keystone level 12, a new affix replaces Xalatat's Bargain. Replaces. Okay, so these two affixes go away. The level 2 affix goes away. And at this level, Xalatath revokes her bargains, empowering dungeon creatures with a 20% increase in health and damage. So she betrays players. No longer can you get these Kiss Curse affix things. And instead, enemies get 2 extra key levels of health and damage at level 12. So basically, this is really saying, like, okay, levels 1 to 11 are like old M+, levels. Levels 12 plus are, there is no push week. There is only level 4 fortified or tyrannical. Level 10 tyrannical or fortified. Oh god, okay, this is a big thing as well. Yeah, fortified and tyrannical now serve as milestone affixes that alternate between 4 and 10 on a weekly rotation. So you're always going to have fortified and tyrannical at 10 and higher. That's huge. Okay, I mean, a lot of people hate fortified and tyran, but if keys are balanced around if high keys are always both are active, you no longer have the situation where it's like, oh god, this week is there's 2 different ways of looking at this. One way of looking at this is you no longer have the situation of like, oh man, this week is a tyran week, therefore it feels bad, because hopefully that means that now Blizzard will look at it and be like, okay, we're not going to have this boss fight take 5.5 minutes every week and 13 key or something like that. So we're going to look at boss base health or something like that and not have that happen. The scary side is like, oh man, if every week is a Tyran week, maybe it will feel like every week is a Tyran week. But realistically, I think it's more likely to feel like for high keys, every week is neither. Like every week is, you could do this. For instance, on PTR, on beta, a common practice is to just put Fort and Tyran on every key, and those definitely feel less bad than just Tyran for high key players, because you're doing them a couple key levels lower, because that's you put whatever you can use the scroll to put it on, and so it doesn't feel as Tyran. And because it is both fortified and Tyran active, that's going to be constraining the key level that you can go to. So you're not going to be having these keys where you're going to be running into these keys where you're getting stopped by, the overall timer, perhaps, rather than the tyrannical bosses, if Blizzard does their balancing job right on that. But there's definitely still a risk that, they could screw that up. In particular, if Blizzard creates dungeons with extremely generous timers, those are going to be the ones where 7-year tyrannical boss fights might end up being the thing that comes in and limits you on the timer. Or extremely one-shotty tyrannical boss fights, like those can potentially become the limiting factor. So timer design is a really important thing for whether this ends up feeling good or bad in high keys. So yeah, okay. Keystones 2 through 12 you get Xalatath's Bargain at 2, you get Fort and Tyran at 4, you get Challenger's Peril at 7, you get Tyran and Fort at 10, and then at 12, Xalatath's Guile replaces the Bargain. This is interesting. I mean, I feel like this is probably good. If anything, like, I remember when they made the announcement about changing it, how high keys and low keys would work, everybody was like, oh man, this sucks. They're going to make high keys have a more fun system than what low keys do. Like, low key players are going to have to deal with bursting and bolstering, and high key players aren't. And, that's going to suck. If anything, I feel like the kind of flip side of this has happened, where Xalatath's Bargain looks pretty sick. This looks pretty fun. And high key players are going to instead have that be taken away for consistency week to week. I think that's probably good for everybody. I don't know. I feel like this is going to be good for everybody. I feel like 12 is a pretty good level to make this shift. If anything, you could maybe raise this to be happening at 13, 14, or 15. Have a couple more key levels of the bargain, because 11 to 12 is going to be a huge spike in difficulty, right? Not only are you going to lose the power of Xalatath's Bargain, you're also going to get an extra 20% health and damage. So it's a really clear delineation between, low keys, farm keys, and push keys that you're only going to play for push. They are going to be like less, I don't want to say fun, but it's less like, variety, less, certainly less variety, right? Like every single key level 12 and up is going to be the same all season, right? There's literally no changing affixes. Every single key from 2 through 11 is going to be the same each season, except for between 4 and 10, whether it's Fort and Tyran is active switches each week, and which Xalatat's Bargain is active switches each week as well. But even in low keys, the keys are going to feel much less overwhelmed by different affixes from week to week. It's important that the Xalatat's Bargains they come up with are fun and good. They probably should make more than just like 4 or however many they were going to have on the affix rows before. Like there should probably be like 6 Xalatat's Bargains, would be my guess, to make it so that there is sufficient variety, because all of the variety in the system is now being carried by this one affix row. So whether they make sure that all of them feel good, feel fun, is important. But crucially, it doesn't really matter if they make one that's like a key level easier than others. Back in old system, if you have a Keystone affix row where there's a bunch of keys, affixes that are like 1 key level harder, that didn't matter for a lot of players, but that kills weeks for high keys, right? Like that changes whether weeks are push weeks or dead weeks. But that's no longer something they have to worry about with Xalatat's Bargain, right? Like Xalatat's Bargain, if they make a particularly easy one, people might be doing 8s instead of 7s that week or something in some groups. It might push some groups over the threshold, for instance, of getting Aspect Crests and Worm's Crest, which is not great, but it's not that big of a deal compared to the impact it would have on like push keys, which no longer exists, right? There's no longer a Xalatat's Bargain in push keys. So Blizzard can err on the side of making the bargain affixes fun, high variety, impactful, powerful, right? Powerful for the players in a way that feels good, without being like, we really got to make sure that this is exactly, a 3% power gain or something like that. Like doesn't matter. The people, the idiot nerd losers who do high keys are not in the conversation, so they don't need to be listened to. So cool. Yeah, I mean, I think that this is a really clever way of accomplishing those goals. One last thing they have is dungeon score. We're evaluating how dungeon scores are granted. We believe these changes, along with our heroic and mythic dungeon changes, provide players with ways to engage dungeons in a setting they prefer. This is a fresh look at M+. We look forward to your feedback and continuing discussion on the affixes and overall system changes. We'll see you in dungeons. Okay, so we don't actually know how they're evaluating the dungeon score. Wow. I am thrilled about this experiment. I don't know for sure if I'm going to like this. Like, I don't know for sure if I could see myself being somebody in the future who's like, man, I do kind of wish things changing. I do kind of miss things changing a bit week to week. Maybe that'll just be the grass is always greener. Maybe that'll just be me always looking for something to complain about. You know me, I love complaining. So that might be that. But it might also be the case that like, actually, even in high keys, it's good for things to change a little bit week to week. Maybe I'll have that complaint. Maybe I'll have some other complaint about Xalatat's Bargains, affixes. Maybe I'll have some other complaint about Fort and Tyran always being active in keys. Maybe I'll tender some of those complaints in the future. I have to play with it a little bit first. What I will say is I'm thrilled by how much of a fundamental rethink they're taking at this. I'm thrilled that Sanguine, Bolstering, and Raging are finally dead. These things have been responsible for so much unfun in M+ over the past few years. Seeing them shot is just it's a beautiful day. Anything else that happens today, it doesn't matter. It's already a good day. We love that. And I'm also just really excited to see Blizzard, deploy a change of this magnitude, particularly because it seems like they chefed this thing up in like 2 weeks, given the change, like given that they came up with that level 4 row and then they had that little interview and now they have this thing. Like, this is a impressive pace of development. Now, of course, they don't have all the Xalatat's Bargains yet, but these ones both look pretty fun. Especially Ascendant looks more fun to me than Frenzied, because this one's a little bit more gamey, a little bit more gameplay. I do suspect that these affixes will be more fun if they do have a little bit more gameplay to them, because they are the only gameplay affix on left. So they can have a moderate amount of gameplay, and that can be pretty good. But yeah, I mean, I could see there being some iteration needed in some parts of this for sure. I don't know exactly what that iteration should look like. I will wait until I test the M+ myself before giving those thoughts. But overall, I'm just incredibly optimistic about this look at the future. And I actually think they've done a really good job here of accomplishing objectives for low-key and high-key players at the same time. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Let me know what your first impressions are, given the level of keys that you play. I would advise, again, temper your most positive and negative expectations of anything until you've gotten the chance to check it. So if you think this is going to be the best thing ever, I'm happy for you. Don't get your hopes up too high. Let's wait and see what it actually looks like. If you think this is going to be the worst thing ever, again, let him cook. Let him try some stuff. Temper your problems with it. Feel free to post some feedback about it. But I think that even if you think that this is a turn in a wrong direction, it is a big turn that they're taking here, and it's very clearly based on the feedback that they've been receiving. So that is at least an incredibly encouraging development, and there's no reason that they can't do more of this based on the feedback they get to this cycle. So if this does end up being a brick and everybody kind of agrees with that, then for some reason, then I'm sure that they can adjust further. Although, of course, only a couple more weeks left to really make big changes in beta. Anyways, hope you've enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think in the comments below. See you in the next one. Bye.